Okay. Okay, so welcome to our last lecture in 3114. I just really wanted to do a couple of things today. One is to just give a quick revision on the course that we've done so far, and then obviously discuss the structure of the exam. So when we first met, we started talking about what is a new product, to give context to the idea of new product development. And we said that these could be either products that are new to the world, products that are new to the firm, line extensions, product improvements, repositioned products, or cost reductions. And we introduced a framework within which we would direct ourselves and move through the new product development process, which really started with the idea of trying to identify the area of opportunity based on a situational analysis that might give us rise to areas of new product development. Having identified that area of opportunity, we would move into the second phase, which is the concept generation phase, at which point we would then move into phase 3, which was basically concept evaluation, and phase 4 into basically the development, largely the design phase, and then of course finally we would enter into our launch plan. So if we look at the first phase, which was the phase related to opportunity identification and selection, we started the idea of saying that a mission statement was incredibly important to a firm because this gave rise to the vision of the organisation and set the tone for ultimately where the brand might like to play into the future. Nike's mission statement was to bring inspiration and innovation to every athlete in the world. Hallmark was to make the world a more caring place by helping people laugh, love, heal, and say thanks, reach out, and make meaningful connections. Tesla was about accelerating the world's transition to sustainable energy. And Facebook was about giving people the power to share and make the world more open and connected. We then suggested that there were several ways in which we could identify areas of opportunity in new markets as existing markets became less desirable. We could find another location or venue. We could leverage the firm's strengths into a new activity centre. We could identify a fast-growing need and adapt your product to that need. You could find a new to the firm industry. Once we had identified our area of opportunity, it was suggested that each area of opportunity should be assigned a product innovations charter. In your individual projects, you only had to look at one, but in practice, we might have multiple product innovation charters going on at any one time in an organisation. And the product innovation charter really sort of set the tone and gave direction in the development of conceptual ideas against the area of opportunity, and it outlined the background, the area of focus, the goals and objectives, and the guidelines that should direct concept development against that area of opportunity. Then we moved into the second phase, which was the concept generation phase. So from that product innovation charter, we start to give thought to the types of concepts that might help resolve the area of opportunity. The idea here being that we had at least 2 of 3 inputs to have a feasible new product concept, in that we needed a benefit, we needed a form and a technology. The form was the physical thing being created, or for a service, the set of steps by which the service will be created. The technology was obviously the source by which the form is to be attained, and the benefit is obviously the benefit that helps resolve the unmet want or need amongst our desired target audience. And the concept was that technology permits us to develop a form that ultimately provides a benefit. There were some different patterns in concept generation that we suggested. The most traditional way for us was to come up with a need state where there was an unmet need. That was the more traditional marketing mechanism. Against that unmet need, we'd develop a technology and then produce a form within which we could deliver that technology. But it could also take other different paths, so you could go technology, need, form, or form, technology, benefit. Didn't really matter where you started in the context of starting with any one of these three inputs. We gave some examples, and a lot of you, even in the context of your own group work, would have come up with different examples that identified different need states, different technologies, and different forms that ultimately went about resolving the same problem. We spoke about where do great ideas come from, and we looked at toolkits for user innovation. We looked at crowdsourcing. We looked at lead users and their capacity to help us understand problems that consumers face, to which they often have solutions. We spoke about the idea of open innovation as a strategy to get access to technologies, research and products in the new product development process. We spoke about some of the key advantages of open innovation in that it increases the speed of getting new products to market, it can cut down risk, and it can generate new innovative ideas. And we can leverage different areas of competency. So one firm might have a competency in its brand name, it might have competency in its access to a consumer base or a target audience, it might have its competency in its capacity to have access to different sales channels. It might have its competency in perhaps being able to have access to a particular technology that we want. And this is where two organisations come together to form a partnership in order to get a product to market. We looked at various examples of this within the context of our lecture series. We looked at some of the principles of open innovation in that it was both inbound and outbound. It was about obtaining know-how from external partners, and it's also about monetizing technology through licensing. It's not outsourcing our products. Basically, the external sources are viewed as complementary to internal sources so that innovation can be more efficient. And it's all about selecting the best partners in order to create mutual trust. We looked at how open innovation works within Procter & Gamble, with the Sun Health Solutions that developed the UV sensing technology used in Huggies swim pants that contain UV sensors to help parents monitor their child's exposure to UV radiation. We looked at Mr. Clean scrubbing brush, which uses technology originally used as insulation in the auto industry. And we looked at P&G as they partnered with a French company involved in wound care to create and develop Olay regenerators. So that was open innovation and user toolkits, crowdsourcing, lead users, etc., as mechanisms that could be used to source and generate concepts. We also looked at finding and solving customer problems as a source of concept generation. This is the one most commonly used. Often we would have done research at this stage. We didn't in your stage, as part of your projects at this very early stage because you have enough research to do. But often we could determine the product or activity category, identify heavy users, and then gather an understanding of the problems that are associated with category use, sort and rank them according to their severity and importance. And we looked at different examples of that. In particular, we looked at Dyson's air fan and the different types of problems that were faced by conventional fans, such as spinning blades that chop airflow. The blades were typically difficult to clean. They can be dangerous to children. The fan can tip over because it's unbalanced due to the spinning blades. And typically they were highly energy inefficient. But Dyson was able to address all these problems in its bladeless technology by introducing airstream that was smooth and eliminated various dangers associated with traditional, more conventional fans. Low centre of gravity, which eliminated them tipping over. They were much more effective in cooling and far more efficient in energy, and ultimately there were no blades to clean or cut people's or children's fingers off with. We also looked at different analytical approaches to finding new product concepts, and here we introduced two concepts. We started with the idea that the analytical approaches are based on understanding why consumers buy products, and there are three types of attributes that we looked at. We looked at features, functions, and benefits. Features were really about what the product consists of. Functions were all about what the product does and how it works, and benefits were how the product provides satisfaction to the user. And theoretically, there was a sequence that suggested that features permit a function which ultimately provides for the consumer a benefit. So what is the role of analytical attribute techniques in concept generation? Basically, new product concepts are created by changing or adding one or more of its current attributes. We looked at perceptual gap analysis as a technique to identify opportunities. And we looked at largely determinant gaps, attribute rating gaps, and overall similarity gaps. The two most commonly used ones were determinant gaps. These were produced by managers within an organisation. The perceptual attribute rating perceptual map is actually done through research. Can anyone tell me what research technique we use to arrive at what the attributes might be in order to identify the attributes that could go onto the perceptual map? What's the technique that we use? Factor analysis, yeah? So factor analysis is what we're looking at to identify what the axes should be. So this is really what a determinant gap. The determinant gap was done in the absence of factor analysis because this is what you're doing as marketers in order to find gaps. The determinant gap had some limitations, a few limitations. One is that it was managerial in its orientation. It identifies gaps, it doesn't identify demand. So there might be a good reason why there is actually no one in that particular gap. It might be that no one has any demand for a product that sits within that gap. Factor analysis helped overcome some of those drawbacks, and it was a statistical tool used to reduce a number of large potential attributes to a number of small factors that could actually go onto our perceptual map in order to identify the factors that were most important to consumers, and where there were gaps on the map, the AR perceptual map, that could give rise to areas of opportunity for our brand. Second technique that we looked at was conjoint analysis. The idea behind conjoint analysis is that we are looking at the optimal levels of an attribute, and the idea being that if the elements of an attribute are missing, the bundle of attributes are missing, or that a product doesn't have those bundle of attributes, then that might give rise to a new product opportunity because there's no one there with the appropriate amount, level, and type of attribute that happens to be incredibly important to consumers. So we spoke about this quite a bit. We gave some examples. Then we moved on to having looked at some quantitative mechanisms to come up with new product concepts. We started to look at some qualitative techniques. We looked at dimensional analysis, we looked at checklists, we looked at relationship analysis, we looked at analogy as types that the textbook discussed. The checklist really looked at a whole range of different questions that we could answer in order to try and identify new product concepts against our PIC, etc., etc. So each one of those served a different purpose in order for us to potentially arrive at different concepts. Having identified different concepts, deploying those individual techniques, groups will have used different techniques. Some will have used perceptual mapping, perhaps, using determinant gap analysis. Others would have used more creative techniques to help try and get to the ideas that they ultimately came up with as part of their group report. We obviously start to move concepts into the concept evaluation phase. And in the concept evaluation phase, we're really trying to get feedback from consumers as to their likely intention to purchase, how much they might purchase. in order to give us a degree of comfort and confidence in certain elements of our ATAR model. In particular, we were interested in intention to purchase and repeat levels. We were still at this stage making assumptions about availability and awareness, but the whole idea here was we were trying to evaluate which of the concepts that we had put into research were most preferred by our potential target audience. Many ideas are ultimately eliminated before we move into concept testing. The Product Innovation Charter sets a framework that eliminates most new product ideas even before they are developed into concepts. Ideas of the following types tend to be excluded, so ideas requiring technologies the firm does not have, or ideas to be sold to customers about whom the firm has no close knowledge. Ideas that offer too much or too little innovativeness, or ideas wrong in other dimensions, not low in cost, too close to certain competitors, etc. We looked at other criteria for early stage screening of product concepts. We looked at the idea of uniqueness, the idea of need fulfillment, feasibility, impact, scalability, and strategic fit. And these are some of the things that you would have considered as you move through thinking about which of the concepts you might move as part of that early screening analysis, so that you weren't taking concepts into research that didn't meet some of these criteria in order to save you some money in that research phase. We looked at other important factors like market worth. So what is the attractiveness of the new product to the target customer population? We looked at firm worth. So is the new product project viewed positively by management? Does this new product enhance the firm's competencies? And we looked at competitive insulation. So to what degree can our competitive advantage in this new product ultimately be insulated against? So ideas that passed this initial screening test moved into what we referred to as the concept testing phase. In this concept testing phase, we put together a concept board that was ultimately tested against a questionnaire. And the procedure for concept testing involved preparing that concept board, selecting respondents, selecting the response situation, preparing interview questions, and then obviously interviewing, tabulating, and analysing results. This was an example of what your concept board was intended to look like. As you progress through, we looked at, introducing an insight or the problem. We looked at how the benefit, how it addresses the problem. We looked at the reasons to believe. We looked at a selling idea or a restatement of the benefit as a selling idea. We sort of told consumers where they could buy it, how much it would cost. We gave some instructions, we had some visuals, etc., etc. And I gave you a template that set out what these key criteria were in order for you to get to a well-articulated and well-delivered concept board. A second measure that we looked at was the full screen analysis, where we looked at commercial accomplishment and technical accomplishment. We did some weighted scoring in order to identify those areas that might make one concept more difficult to do than another, and may help direct which of the concepts that you have in research that you might want to take forward into the next phase, which was the design phase. Clearly, the concept with the highest score was the concept that was the most feasible, and it served and had a purpose, but it too had its limitations in that it could be manipulated by the new product development team, simply by virtue of the fact that it was constructed by them. The research was obviously more solid because it was independent of the new product development team. It was really about respondents responding to your potential new ideas. At this time, we needed to refine and develop our product forecasting, for which there are several strategies that we introduced. And this was, the different types of strategies that you can deploy as we progress into trying to forecast for NPD. So if we were looking at current product technology in current markets, we'd be looking at sales analysis. If we were looking at new product technology in current markets, we'd be looking at things like product line analysis and life cycle analysis. If we're looking at current product technologies in new markets, we'd be looking at customer analysis and market analysis. And if we had new product technology in new markets where we had very little information from past history and very little information on which to act, we'd often look at what-if analysis, where we'd have different scenarios that tested different levels in order for us to get a little bit more of an understanding of the types of measures that we might adjust as part of our ATAR model because of the lack of information and history that we have pertaining to taking those new ideas to market. We also looked at having done all that, arrived at what concept we wanted to take forward. We developed a product protocol behind that, and this whole idea was to direct development and the launch phase in order to make sure that everyone was on the one page. Then we moved into product development, where we looked at developing prototypes. We suggested there were two types of prototypes. On the one hand, we had comprehensive, which were complete prototypes, and we had focused prototypes that were largely incomplete. We looked at various types of product use testing. We looked at the monadic test, we looked at the sequential monadic test, we looked at the paired comparison and the triangular comparison as mechanism through which we could actually do product testing. So that was our second phase of research that we looked at as part of the new product development process. The first stage obviously being our concept testing, then into product use testing, and later we moved into market testing, which we'll get to in a minute. Then we moved into the launch phase. As part of this launch phase, we looked at a number of key issues. We looked at strategic platform decisions, where we looked at what type of demand is sought, how permanent is a new product intended to be, how aggressive will our market entry be, how should we manage the replacement of the existing with the new, what will our new image be, what is our proposed brand architecture. We looked at strategic action decisions, where we really had to take a step back and have a good look into how the market or the category could be segmented in order for us to understand what were the motivations, attitudes, interests and opinions, perhaps buyer behaviour, perhaps demography of those types of users that resided in homogeneous segments in order for us to more closely be able to match the wants and needs of those consumers with the attributes or benefits that were inherently a part of our new product that we were going to take to market. And once we had segmented the market, targeted a particular group, we needed to develop a positioning which was a reflection of our brand's core promise in order to create differentiation from the competition and motivation towards our user group. We spent quite a lot of time talking about this notion of segmentation, targeting and positioning and how it works theoretically and in practice. We looked at the different mechanisms that can be used to create segments, from geographic to demographic to behavioural to benefit to psychographics. I tend to look at psychographics personally about attitudes, interests and opinions. Your textbook talks about values, activities and lifestyles. Effectively, they are the same thing, different words for the same thing. I just tend to look at what are the attitudes, interests and opinions of users towards the category. We split out benefit. Benefit is actually part of behavioural in practice. But here we're looking at the different need states that products might deliver against. We looked at the toothpaste market as an example of that. Behavioural largely being about involvement, usage rates, purchase intent. But in practice, we often use what we refer to as multivariate segmentation in order to come up with a segmentation analysis that might incorporate more than just one of these categories. We gave an example here of benefit segmentation, and we gave an example of what psychographic segmentation looks like. We spoke about positioning, positioning to an attribute being a feature, a function, or a benefit. Most commonly, we position to a function or a benefit. Slightly confusing here because your textbook actually talks, your textbook talks about attributes as being these three things. where a lot of textbooks across other subjects that you will have studied actually talk about positioning being built out of an attribute or a benefit, attribute being either product or non-product, and either intrinsic or extrinsic to the product. So I tend to look at, and if you are doing that, then effectively what you're doing is looking at attributes as largely intrinsic or extrinsic to the product. But also benefits. Benefits can be split into three different types of benefits. They can either be functional, experiential, or symbolic. And we looked at how these can differ. Functional are obviously intrinsic advantages of using the product, such as shampoo that cleans or softens or makes your hair shiny. Experiential benefits basically answer the question what it makes you feel like, exhilarated or refreshed. And symbolic benefits are actually the extrinsic advantage of using a product. So they help you belong, they help you feel glamorous, they don't help you feel glamorous, they create a glamour look, they create individuality. So that's really how these tend to split out as key categories. We looked at some examples of this. So we looked at Johnnie Walker Scotch being positioned around a benefit which was making personal progress. Hans Superdry positioned around a feature of low carbs. Volvo, a benefit of protection. DHL, a benefit of keeping your promises. Toyota Hilux, a feature of built tough. Coke, a benefit of social glue that brings people together. And Apple, a benefit of creative empowerment. Then we looked lastly at tactical launch decisions. And here specifically, we were looking at tactics to build awareness, tactics to overcome barriers to trial, tactics to motivate distributors, tactics to drive repeat purchase, and specific tactics for low relative advantage to competition and low compatibility with user experience. We had an example of a matrix here that demonstrated some strategies that your text discussed in this context. But as you can see, these tactics are largely about driving the ATAR model. Okay? They're deliberately designed at driving the ATAR model. So the types of tactics that you need to be considering are what are the tactics that we can deploy to drive awareness. We might have a low level of awareness. It might be one of the problems that we identify or that we are concerned about. We want to drive awareness. The types of things that we might do to drive awareness might be advertising. We might have trial. What do we want to do with trial? It might relate to things like sampling, consumer promotion, etc., etc. And you might have a whole range of different creative strategies against each of these launch tactics to help drive the levels of the ATAR model to optimize your in-market performance post your launch. Last week we spoke about the final stage of research, which is ultimately about market testing. And here there were various methods that we could deploy. We spoke about the pseudo sale, which incorporated the speculative sale and the simulated test market. We looked at the controlled sale. We looked at informal sale method, direct marketing and mini markets. And then we looked at the full sale method, which largely the text talks about test marketing and full rollout. So that was all our content, okay? Hopefully you've all arrived with your projects and you've been able to apply each of those steps and stages to get to some really interesting ideas. And that's really at heart what this course is all about. It's teaching you some frameworks within which you can operate to put together some ideas that get you to some interesting concepts that resolve problems in the marketplace in order for you to fulfill unmet wants and needs. All clear? Was everyone happy with where they ended up with their projects? You're all going to commercialize them and make lots of money? Okay, so I know that at this stage you're all wanting to hear about the exam. So let's move on to talking about the exam. The exam will be a 2-hour exam. You'll have 10 minutes reading time. It's worth 30 marks. There will be 30 multiple choice in Part A that are worth half mark each, a total of 15 marks. I would allow 60 minutes or 2 minutes per question. It will cover all the chapters in the text or lecture slides, excluding chapter 20, which won't be examined in either part A or part B of the exam. Okay, so public policy won't be in your exam. The multiple choice are heavily biased towards the back end of the course. Okay, realistically, the vast majority are in that back end. You should know now all the front end questions. Okay, you should be able to, just by virtue of your having done the mid-semester, having done your project, those front end ones should be pretty straightforward to you. And like I said, it is biased towards the back end. There are some from the front end, but they're mostly biased towards the back end. Like the previous mid-semester exam, they'll be largely application of theory questions. You have 30 sample multiple choice questions that I have posted online, for which you also have answers that in your preparation you can do. Okay? So that's part A. Part B is 3 extended answer questions. You'll need to write approximately 2 pages per question, but that can vary. Okay? It doesn't always have to be 2 pages. It's all about quality, not quantity. And I'll explain why it's difficult for me to give you an understanding of exactly how much you might need to write. But let's say on average a couple of pages. The idea is that you unfold and respond to the question. Very difficult question for me to answer this one because I never actually do the exam. I write the exam, but I've never done an exam. Okay? I don't do one because I'm scared I might fail, right? No, I just don't do them. So I write them, but I never actually physically write the answer out. I give a guide to the tutors about what should be contained in the answer, but I don't formally write the answer. Okay? So let's say 2 pages. Okay? But I could ask you to write a concept board, and the concept board might only take you 1 page. So it's all dependent on the question. Okay? So allow 60 minutes for part B or 20 minutes per question. Each question is worth 5 marks each to give you a total of 15 marks. So you're given a mini case study. It's about a page long. So the case study is about a page long. And it will contain a fictitious new product idea that I've made up. I typically make these products up as a result of looking online at what might be happening in a marketplace. So you might read it and go that it's not completely fictitious, that it is actually, you may have seen it before. Depends how much reading you do about new products. Okay? I say it's fictitious because I vary what might be happening to add elements into the case that allow you to correct, which gives me opportunity to ask you specific questions. Okay? So all you need to understand at this stage is you'll be presented a case. It's 1 page. It's about a new product concept that a multinational brand is bringing to the market. You will all recognise the brand the minute you see the case. So there'll be no ambiguity. It's not like you'll sit there and go, I've lived under a rock for 20 years. I've never heard of the brand name Uber, or I've never heard of the brand name Pepsi, or I've never heard of the brand name Coke. It's none of those brands, but it'll be like that. Okay? You'll be asked to draw upon theory as you make a recommendation to the firm identified in the mini case around a specific question. So as I said, there are 3 questions. And for example, you might have to identify the advantages of product platforms as the firm moves forward with its NPD project. You may be asked to advise the firm on the advantages or disadvantages of adopting crowdsourcing to tap into ideas from customers. You may be asked by the firm to recommend if they should use factor analysis or conjoint analysis to develop a promising new product concept. You will not have to take a calculator in, and you will not have to do any maths. If I was to ask you a question like that, it would be talking about the concepts. Okay? So there's no physical maths involved in this exam. You may be asked to recommend the best type of product use test to use for a product that this particular company has been developing. You might be asked to advise on why the firm may wish to take two of its concepts into a full screen analysis. You may have to recommend the different methods the firm could use to segment the market or the strategies they could deploy to position the brands to their desired target audience, etc., etc. Okay. So, you're not, when you open up the exam, you're not going to go, oh my God, where did you get that question from? Okay? You're going to be very obvious questions. Okay? Make sense? So you're not going to open the exam and freak out. In a multiple choice, I always think the multiple choice are quite easy. Students tend to not do as well in the multiple choice. You guys did pretty well in the multiple choice that you've just recently done as part of your mid-semester. The back end, I find the back end is reasonably straightforward, but it's going to be based on your capacity to understand the concept, define key terms, relate the concept to the case, to give it context, etc., etc. So, if asked, identify the advantages and/or disadvantages. And when you're talking about the advantages and disadvantages, it's really about. This shouldn't be complicating as well. It's really being able to use your logic in trying to identify what the advantages or disadvantages of a particular approach might be. If you're asked for a recommendation, which you almost inevitably will be, outline the alternatives and proceed to making a recommendation based on the case. So if, for example, I was to ask you about the best type of product use test to use for a product, I would expect you, I'd probably say, what are the different ways that a company could do a product use test, in which case you'd have to identify all the different ways that a company could do a product use test, and then I'd finish by saying, make a recommendation to brand X on what you think they should adopt, or what product use test they should adopt. So you see how I'm trying to blend theory with practice. Make sense? The cases are quite fun, they're quite interesting, I think you'll enjoy them. They're on, not like a product, every single one of you will know this product category. It's not like you're going to read the product category and go, oh my God, I stopped playing with Barbie dolls when I was 10, and boys going, I've never played with a Barbie doll. So it's not going to be like that. You'll all go, understand the brand, know the brand 100%. Really interesting idea that they're doing. Okay, so I think you'll like that. As part of the multiple choice, my advice to students is always to, I honestly do not go out of my way. I used to hate this when I was a student. I used to hate lecturers who would put ambiguous questions in, and you'd go, oh my God, the imbecile has only changed one thing, and it could be A or B, because it's effectively saying the same thing. Right? I honestly do not go out of my way to create that degree of silliness. Okay? I always have something like that might be really dumb in there that is clearly not the answer. But there's always a right answer. If you get a question like, could it be A or C or all of the above? Well, you've only got to find two in an all of the above question that makes sense for it to have to be all of the above, right? So they're normally typically quite easy to recognise, I would have thought. Okay. But I often find it interesting the way the students will go with something different, or where there's two clearly dominant potentials. Use the strategy where you you mitigate all the ones that are clearly not the answer, and if you have to make a guess, at least try and get it down to a 50-50. And then there's hope there's no stewards that change. Do you know that yesterday I had 2 bets in the Melbourne Cup? I spent $2 on 2 random trifectas. And I actually got the trifecta and I paid $5,000. And then there was a protest and I didn't get it. Do you know how gutted I feel? Don't really know where that came from, but I just needed to get it off my chest. So don't be too worried about the exam, okay? You'll have to prepare for it. The multiple choice are not easy. They're not easy, but they're about the same level as the last test that you did, okay? Some of you might prefer to do the back end first. It's entirely up to you as to how you approach the exam. Good luck. Any questions? Typically, in that instance, I'd be wanting to, I would ideally like you to be explaining, defining what they are, giving examples about how they could be used. And the more depth that you can give to the answer, the more likely you are to distinguish yourself from other students. So my answer to that question is the more that you can bring to that response and the more depth that you can bring, then the better that is. No. So you might not know. It might be deliberate that I haven't told you who it is targeting. I might ask you how the category is segmented. I might ask you firstly, explain the concepts of segmentation, targeting, and positioning. I then might say to you, for example, provide us an understanding of how this category might be segmented, identifying a key segment of the audience this brand might target, and then using the brand mantra tool, come up with the brand positioning. Another type of question I can ask you.
All the 3 short answers based on the same case?
Yeah, all relate to the one case. Thank goodness. Do you know how long it takes me to write one of those case studies? It takes a long time. Any other questions?
Is there any right answer, or do we just have to manage to justify?
Good question. Is there any right answer, or do we just need to justify? In a lot of cases, there is no right answer in your recommendation. It's all about how you justify your answer and the strength that you give to your justification. So, for example, if we go back to this question here, we might product use testing. Whether we're looking at the paired or triangular comparison test, they're both pretty similar. But you might have a rationale as to why you think it's better to go with 3 versus 1. The case might say that it's developed 2 options, which might make the second one a much better, clearer answer because it might well be that they want to test two different concepts. So, that could be planted into the case study to make students get to a recommendation that is more appropriate, but it may not. And if it didn't, then you'd be making a justification as to what you think is the best. So it all depends on what's contained in the case. But there could be instances where there's no right answer. Definitely could be instances where there's no right answer. Any other questions? So how would I prep for this exam? Really understand the concepts theoretically. Understand what they're trying to achieve. Look at those kind of elements that have a degree of chunkiness to them that are going to allow for sizable questions to be asked, because they are extended questions. And just make sure you understand the concepts. That's the critical thing. I don't think the concepts are very difficult, and the only people that are really going to have trouble are those that have done no work as part of the group project. Like if you haven't done any, if you've worked in your group as part of your group project, you should all be very familiar with the concepts already. They should not be of any huge surprise to you. You should be quite familiar with them. And then really what you're trying to do is tidy and tighten your potential responses. Some of you, if you've done a lot of work on the group, you could probably go in and talk quite confidently, but maybe only get yourself a pass mark. So your preparation is actually really tightening up your responses. Okay? If you haven't done much work as part of your group work, then ultimately, invariably, you're going to be in more of a problematic situation. And for the developing your understanding of the multiple choice questions, do the practice exam. Go back again and do the previous exam, the mid-semester exam again. Read the text, even if you're just reading a chapter of the text before you go to bed at night without even making notes, just refreshing your memory on the key components of the text. The important components of the text, we have covered it in lectures. Like I said before, there might be one or two questions in the multiple choice exam that really are designed to test whether you have read the text, but it will normally be something that you will have read that's would have been a term that would have come up quite openly within the text. Okay, so and it's only in there to capture the student that might get full marks. Might be trying to get full marks for the multiple choice. There's not many like that in there. I don't go out of my way to make life difficult for you in that context. Okay, so do this study, do the prep, then do the multiple choice questions. Go back and do the mid-semester one as well, just to clarify. Sometimes I've been known to take examples out of the mid-semester and put them back in to the same exam. No. Sorry. And the reason why I say no is this. The textbook actually has, you can find these online, right? I don't use them, but if you can find them, knock yourself out. I'm happy for you to do it. The textbook, whenever we use a textbook, the textbook gives lecturers sample exam questions. multiple choice, sample multiple choice questions. Probably use other types of questions as well. But I don't use it. And the reason why I don't use it is all those multiple choice questions you can find online. Okay, so you get a sessional academic who's not a full-time academic, who's maybe worked at a university once, is not meant to be giving the answers to students, gives the questions and the answers to students. Students post them online, and then the textbook doesn't go about rewriting new ones. Okay, so you can't use them because students have access to them. So students could go and get the 200 multiple choice questions that are published online from this text, and I guarantee you if we were to go online, we'd find them. They'd all be there. Okay. So I have to write my own multiple choice questions. I've got something like 300 multiple choice questions that I've written. Once again, do you know how long it takes to write multiple choice questions? So that's why I don't give them to you, because I have to try and mix them up. And the uni has a policy that each exam has to be different, so we can't use the same exam. It has to be 100% different from the previous year. Okay, and that means every multiple choice question has to be 100% different from the previous year. It can be the same intent, but it can't be physically the same question. So because of the time consumption, that's why I then write additional ones that I can't put in the exam, okay, which are the ones that I'm publishing online to give you as sample questions. But if you want to try and find the ones that are online, I'd encourage you to do it. It's another way to build your understanding of the concepts. Some of them are application questions. A lot of them are like just seeing whether you're a good parrot. Okay. But yeah, go online if you can find them. You just type in the text, the author of the text, and I guarantee you'll find them. So yeah, I have absolutely no problem if you want to go and do that. And it could be a good way to study. It has true and false questions. I think they're less valuable than the multi-choice questions. And they lay them out chapter by chapter. So yeah, go and knock yourself out. Final answer for any questions, or final request for any further questions. Okay, I really do hope you've enjoyed the course. The focus has really been trying to give you as much feedback as we can, giving you self-assessment feedback. So feedback, certainly my intention is to give you feedback by allowing you to do practice exams, giving you generalised feedback on the case study, giving you feedback in relation to your own, from your tutors in relation to the individual and group tasks that you've been participating in order to make sure that you're comfortable with where you're heading. The focus of the course is very much not about entrepreneurship, it's actually about new product development in a formalised environment which happens through process. Entrepreneurship doesn't necessarily take this more formalised approach, but for those of you who go into working in a large multinational organisation across any industry type, we'll be following a format very similar to the one that we've been running through this course. And that's been very much my experience in the practical execution of NPD. The feedback I've got from the tutors is that you've come up with some really interesting ideas, which is wonderful, and I hope you've really enjoyed that experience as part of this course. I will make sure that you have great feedback again on your reports, and I will also ensure that you have those marks released prior to going into the final exam, so you know where you sit. I wish you all the best in your careers. I thank you for your attendance here at the lectures, and I wish you all the best in your exam. So thank you, and I shall see you around the campus. If you see me, say hi. Take care. No problem. Take care. See you. Good to see you. Yeah. Hey guys, if you could fill in the review of the course, that'd be highly